Hello, and welcome to this event hosted by Labour and Palestine in association with Arise, a festival of left ideas entitled Women for Palestine, a timely event this evening and a show of solidarity taking place just after International Women's Day that occurred this past weekend. To introduce myself, I'm Sarah Woolley, recently re-elected Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union General Secretary and long-term international solidarity activist. To quickly introduce Labour and Palestine, it is a platform created in 2018 to supplement the work of important campaigns like the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and it's supported by ASLEF, CWU, the NUM, TSSA, Unison and Unite the Union. We meet at a vital time for all of us interested in campaigning for the Palestinian cause, with Trump doubling down on the US arming Israel and its war crimes, and sadly the British government doing the same. This is despite the ICJ ruling that there is a plausible case of genocide being committed by Israel in Gaza since October 2023. All current signs are that aggressions and human rights abuses against the people of Palestine are set to intensify again in the period ahead in Gaza and also in the West Bank, clearly acting against the Palestinian people's rights. But the Palestinian people continue in Palestine and around the world to seek justice and self-determination. And we will specifically be discussing today how Palestinian women are at the forefront of campaigning for human rights in Palestine today, defending homes, land and people. As the event goes on, please do make a donation towards hosting and streaming costs using the link provided, and also tell us where you are joining us from in the Q&A function on Zoom. I love these events because we see people from all around the world joining and listening. We have a range of speakers with us today from across progressive movements here in Britain, as well as part of our all-woman platform, who will make a number of short contributions before we have an extended contribution from our Palestinian guest. So I will move swiftly on and introduce our first speaker, who is Jess Barnard, Labour NEC member, who went on an international solidarity delegation to Palestine in 2022 and is a regular speaker at our vital national demonstrations for Palestine and a long-term supporter of Labour and Palestine, who are co-hosting today's events. So Jess, you are very welcome.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you to the organisers as well. And thank you to all of you who have joined us today. International Women's Day, it's not about being a girl boss or a CEO or any other kind of nonsense that people try to reduce women's solidarity to. It's not these individualist capitalist buzzwords. This day is, and it should be, about the struggles and resilience and the victories of women across the globe. And it's a real honour to be on this panel with some truly incredible women from across the movement for Palestine. So thank you for having me. Women are the cornerstone, as we know, for struggles for justice and equality and liberation in every part of the world. But the women on all of our minds on this International Working Women's Day this year and for many years to come are and will be Palestinian women whose fight for freedom is inseparable from the global struggle for women's liberation. As you will all know, Palestinian women have long been resisting against occupation and against apartheid and a system that stigmatizes them and dehumanizes them and their experiences. And as we see here in the UK in the speeches of our politicians and the representation in the national media, they reduce these experiences of Palestinian women to sort of unfortunate, unavoidable consequences rather than what we know them to be, which are abhorrent and systematic injustices, which in any just and equal world would have been prevented by our so-called world leaders. From the Nakba for over 75 years, generations of Palestinian women have endured the brutalities of displacement, apartheid, and military occupation. They've had their homes demolished, their children imprisoned, and their lands stolen. And in Gaza, Palestinian women have lived under a suffocating 16-year blockade and, of course, 18 months of a genocide, and the horrors of which we have all seen on our screens over the past year and a half. They face crimes against humanity, being denied access to food, water, electricity, medical supplies at the hands of Israel, supported by the US and the UK governments. They've endured constant bombardment, loss of loved ones, C-sections without pain relief, no access to menstrual products, stripped of the dignity that healthcare and a home provide people and those basic human rights. Now, some of you know I've spoken before, but in 2022, I met with women working to support children in Gaza. And those women told us story after story of Palestinian children who were experiencing serious PTSD, wetting the bed from the fear of bombs going off around their homes, something no child should have to endure. Those women told us about case after case of really deep psychological trauma of children who had been captured by the IDF, captured and beaten by illegal settlers. I will never, ever forget those women, the work they do, and the impossible burden that they carry, and how much more we need to be doing to support them. When we visited the West Bank, we saw for ourselves how Palestinian women face daily violence from the Israeli occupation, from the dehumanizing checkpoints, students being denied the basic rights to attend their schools and to study, home demolitions, constant threat of arrest or violence. And that's a reality not just for women, but for young girls as well. We visited a refugee centre in the West Bank. We heard a young girl talk about how her act of daily resistance against the illegal occupation was refusing to leave her land. And while that's obviously an incredible testament to the resilience of the Palestinian people, how unjust is it that this child has grown up surrounded by armed military watchtowers and is all too aware of the threat against her right to exist in her own home? So it's with that at the forefront of our minds that we have to confront the hypocrisy of our own Labour government. How is it that our government can pledge to halve violence against women and girls, all while continuing to create weapons for them to be used on women and girls in Palestine? How is it that Keir Starmer can write letters to his daughter about an equal world, all while dismissing the human rights of the daughters of Gaza? How is it that Labour can claim to be in support of breaking down barriers for women when the barriers that Palestinian women face every day are propped up by our support for Israel? So let's be clear, the liberation of Palestinian women cannot be achieved without the liberation of Palestine itself. And we see these disingenuous attempts to justify the actions of Israel as if somehow assisting the liberation of women and LGBT people. It's an insult and it's rooted in colonial mentality, and we have to confront it. We have to be clear that the Israeli occupation is not only a political and military system, it's a gendered system of violence. Palestinian women face the dual burden of occupation and that patriarchy. So on this International Working Women's Day, we stand in full solidarity with Palestinian women. We will continue to amplify their stories, support their movements, their calls to the international community for BDS, challenging our governments who are complicit and corporations who are propping up and enabling the illegal occupation and the genocide. And just for as long as I sit on Labour's National Executive Committee, I promise to continue raising the cause of Palestinian women directly to Keir Starmer and to Angela Rayner, who should never be given a free pass to sit and feel comfortable with their support for Israel. But more importantly, collectively, we continue to organise on the streets, in our workplaces, for justice, defending the right to protest in support of Palestine, and we will not stop until we see liberation for Palestine and a free Palestine. Solidarity.
Thanks so much, Jess. And, thank you for staying true to yourself and continually speaking out on behalf of members and the people of Palestine, and raising the issue directly with the PM and the Deputy PM. I can't imagine how difficult that must be sometimes, sat on the NEC. But the fact that you continue to do it is an inspiration to us all, despite those difficulties. And thank you for joining us this evening as well. I just before I move on to our next speaker, just to let you know, we've got people here from Peterborough, Totnes in Devon, Lambeth, somebody's here from Greece and Poland, told you it was international, Wales, Yorkshire, Oxford, Stockport, Warrington, Birmingham, the list goes on and on. Please keep telling us where you are tuning in from this evening. Our next speaker is an active young member of Unite the Union and speaks today on behalf of our events co-host Arise, a festival of left ideas, Niamh Iliff. And Niamh, you are more than welcome. Please come on in.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for having me today. So my name's Niamh Iliff. I'm a young worker, a United member, and someone like many of my peers who sees the fight for Palestine as inseparable from the fight against imperialism everywhere. And as we've heard from the other speakers already, and before the rest of the conversation start this evening, these discussions are just so important to really view the role of Palestinian women in fighting oppression and provide community strength for all of us fighting imperialism locally. And that's why the work that Arise does is so important in giving us these left-wing spaces to discuss and educate each other, both online, in conferences and at community events. So just to start, I really want to make one thing very clear, that the Palestinian struggle is a workers' struggle, and women from Palestine to Britain are leading this resistance. From Palestinian women that have always been at the front line of the struggle, from head-on resistance, from the First Intifada to community organising and in their own trade unions. And they resist not just Israeli apartheid, but the global order that backs it. From the British Empire that established the Balfour Declaration to the US military complex fueling slaughter in Gaza, while British politicians turn the other way and excuse Israeli war crimes. And recently, the new Trump Gaza hotel, which was the worst tourist advertisement I've ever seen in my life. All the while, Western feminists are staying silent and ignoring their own principles of what women's liberation really means. Because how can we have women's liberation when thousands of Palestinian women are being slaughtered, are being forcibly removed from their homes and being imprisoned? And that's why, as workers in the UK, we are on the side of this global order, but that means that we have the power to act. And it's important to see that British workers are standing up against imperialism. And something that I saw recently was a great TikTok video of a young Palestinian activist in the UK who was on a train journey and sat across from an older gentleman who's wearing a Palestine badge on his blazer. And that gentleman was Arthur Scargill. And they had a long train journey talking about the struggle of Palestinian people, of young workers and women in Britain today, and linking that to the struggles of the trade union movement from the 70s onwards. And I think that really just shows how Palestine is radicalizing a generation of workers today and shedding light on workers' struggles against imperialism, capitalism, and exploitation from the shop floor upwards. And I'm so proud of the young women and my peers that today are aware of the role of our governments and our corporations in the complicity, not just in arming Israel, but repressing resistance, from anti-Palestine laws, policing protests, arresting activists, and criminalising boycotts. And just as the British state attacked the miners and the trade unions in the past, it's now targeting those speaking out against injustice and imperialism today. And I'm proud of the history of British workers standing against apartheid in South Africa, from the dock workers in the 70s who refused to handle goods, and today workers in Britain and beyond that are refusing to transport weapons destined for Israel. And that's why the fight against Israeli apartheid is a fight against our ruling class. It's a fight for socialism and converting our popular fight for Palestine into resistance to pressure our governments and their decisions. So I'm just going to wrap up today by talking a little bit about solidarity and what that really means. Solidarity, as we all know, is not passive, it is active. So if you're in a union, fight for divestment and for strike action. If you're a student, demand that your university cuts ties with Israeli institutions. And if you're in the streets, bring your communities and your families, because every anti-colonial movement was led by mass movements, not empty words. So our task today is to make the Palestinian struggle a crisis for Britain, because Palestinian women are fighting for their lives and their land, and we must fight with them, not with empty words, but with action. Thank you very much. Free Palestine.
Thank you so much, Niamh, and apologies for mispronouncing your surname. It annoys me when other people do it to me, so I do apologise. can you imagine how epic that train journey will have been for that young person talking to Arthur Scargill? I mean, wow. And you're absolutely right. We've got to remember our history, haven't we? We stand on the shoulders of absolute giants that have fought before us in situations like this, and we've got to make sure that our generation now are the shoulders for the people of the future to stand upon. So thank you ever so much for those important reminders, Niamh. Um, we'll move on to our next speaker. The cause of Palestine is part of global campaigns for peace and justice. So it's really important this evening to now be joined by the new CND General Secretary. Congratulations, Sophie Bolt. And Sophie, you are very welcome.
Thanks, and thanks for such a lovely introduction, Sarah. It's just so lovely to be on a platform with such amazing, inspirational women, and we should do this more often, shouldn't we? So as I say, I'm sending huge solidarity greetings from the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. We're really, really proud to be part of the coalition partners that have been organising the sort of the historic mobilisations for Palestine. You know, month in, month out in London, and we are obviously continuing to do so. And it's really great. Massive thanks to Labour and Palestine and Arise for organising this really, really important event. I mean, we know that women historically have always been at the forefront of the struggle for peace and global justice. And with the horrors taking place in Gaza and the West Bank, we need women's voices now more than ever. Israel is once again inflicting, collective punishment on the Palestinian people in Gaza, blocking life-saving aid and now halting critical electricity supplies. And it just totally shows, Israel is only interested in continuing its brutal genocide. Just today, Israeli forces have killed at least 6 people in central and southern Gaza, while 4 people, including an elderly woman, have been killed in the occupied West Bank. So, this is why we must all be out protesting on Saturday in London. So, as well as condemning Israel's horrific destruction of Gaza, and as well as condemning Trump's obscene calls for the enforced ethnic cleansing of all Palestinians from their Gazan homeland, we want to also be celebrating the amazing resilience and courage of Palestinian women. We know that it is overwhelmingly women and children who have been killed in Israel's genocidal war. Back in November 2024, the UN's Human Rights Office reported that over 70% of those killed in Gaza were women and children. Also, we know the reproductive rights of Palestinian women are also at the heart of this, ongoing occupation and now, genocide. Last year's, crucial ruling by the International Criminal Court of the plausible violations of the Genocide Convention by Israel highlighted that the attempt to prevent women from giving birth falls within that convention. In their pivotal case against Israel, South Africa cited the deliberate targeting of hospitals that have had a devastating impact on women's lives, on their ability to survive, to give birth, and for their babies to survive. And none of us can forget those absolutely horrific images of premature babies left to die by the Israeli occupying forces in hospitals. Now, over 1 million women and girls have been displaced, forced to make, to live in makeshift camps, in refugee camps, where disease has been absolutely rife, and poverty, and famine on people's backs. And it's in these conditions that thousands of pregnant women have been forced to give birth. Absolutely sort of horrific experience for women, but also, again, like we have to sort of just be inspired by their incredible resilience and their determination. And of course, now, those who have survived the horror of Israel's genocide are once again under this terrible, terrible siege. So as I say, I pay huge tribute to the resilience and courage of Palestinian women, who are an absolute inspiration to us all. And I call on all of us here, to redouble our efforts to stop this genocidal war. Absolutely, it's at the absolute heart of, the struggle for peace and justice for all of us. And now more than ever, we also have to be fighting for our right to protest. This is a critical human right. And I think that as the government continues to defend the indefensible, that's why they are coming for us. That's why they're attacking us, because we are exposing the absolute horrors that our government is complicit in. So, the history of like the right to protest, women have been at the absolute forefront of that, from the suffragettes, from, the Greenham Common, to, women campaigning for, against male violence. Women have always been at the absolute forefront of protest. So as I say, our struggle for solidarity for Palestine, for Palestinian women, and for Palestinian human rights goes to the absolute heart of progressive struggle for peace and justice for all oppressed peoples, for all oppressed women, for all women across the world. And we will continue fighting until Palestine is free and the people of Palestine have the justice that they deserve. So thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much for that, Sophie. And you're right, we absolutely do need more of these, because we need to get the message out. We need to keep talking to each other. And, you mentioned the Palestinian women are inspirational. They absolutely are. What they're going through right now and still fighting just shows why international solidarity is vital, because they need our support. We have a duty to stand in solidarity with them and act on their behalf and push back. And you're right, we will continue to do that until Palestine is free. So thank you ever so much, Sophie, and good luck with the role. Before I move on to our next speaker, we've got people watching from Edinburgh, Northampton, Luton, Bradford, Cambridge, Bristol, Enfield, Marlow, Derby, all over the UK and abroad. It's fantastic to see you all this evening, and just shows how important this meeting is, and hearing from these fantastic women is too. We will move on to our next speaker. We're going to hear from another young campaigner who's done important campaigning in terms of the boycott, divestment and sanction movements. I put my teeth in at Warwick University, where she is the Disabled Students Officer, Mads Wainman. Mads is also a member of the Momentum National Coordinating Group and was elected last year to the Labour Students National Committee as Disabled Students Rep. Mads, you are more than welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Firstly, I'd like to wish everyone a belated Happy International Working Women's Day. As many have outlined, the tradition of socialist women fighting for change is one that we should all be proud of. And it is so wonderful to be continuing in that tradition with you all. International Working Women's Day began as a socialist day of action, pushed through by socialist parties in multiple countries. The background to this day is radical, and this is needed now more than ever. Intersectionality is intrinsically important, and to celebrate this day with queer women, women of colour, disabled women and trans women is instrumental to the values of International Women's Day. However, to celebrate this in the face of a genocide that hugely impacts women is very, very difficult to do. This is why I'm so thankful for Arise and for Labour for Palestine for putting together this event, as it truly embodies the radical spirit of socialist feminism. This event is not just a celebration of International Women's Day, but it is an action in the face of international injustice. As a history student, I want to use some of my time to trace the vast and instrumental role that women have played in Palestinian organisations under the Israeli occupation from 1948 onwards. Far from passive victims of the regime, women have taken an active role in forming resistance groups and community initiatives that have saved lives. And I think using Palestinian women to find hope and inspiration today for our movement is so important. The Palestinian Federation of Women's Action Committee, or PFWAC, was established in 1978 and in conjunction with the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, ran an exceptional grassroots campaign against the occupation. This included holding informal meetings that discussed the issues facing families and communities, alongside developing textile skills through sewing and knitting during these meetings. The aim of the PFWAC was to continue the production of keffiyehs and Palestinian textiles as an act of resilience when the Israeli government was stamping down on these symbols. As part of Warwick Action for Palestine, we replicated these events with a To Cheese workshop in September 2023, despite backlash from male comrades who did not see this as an event that would politicise people to join our protests and actions against the university's complicity in the occupation. However, we had the largest turnout we had seen since forming as an executive, and it was a deeply emotional and liberating experience. We had the mothers of our Palestinian executive members come and teach us to cheese, whilst discussing their experiences in organisations like the PFWAC. Following October 7th, our protests were well attended by those who said that this event introduced them to our campaign and for the rights of Palestinian people. Once again, female resistance tactics had offered us a very unique and important opportunity to resist in our own small communities, all of which have an impact globally. Additionally, the PFWAC held panels and speeches like this one today, aimed at creating the political education of women and mobilising these women against not just the occupation, but the patriarchy as a whole. They provided help to those women in abusive relationships to leave and focused on the emancipation of women through socialism, which they saw as a movement that could help emancipate the housewife. As a result of the PFWAC, women became heavily involved in leadership positions of many differing organisations in Palestine, and they remain a key role today. During what is now becoming known as the Second Nakba, feminist injustice is rife in Palestine, but so is feminist resistance. At the University of Warwick, there's a fantastic academic called Nicola Pratt, who I have had the privilege of working with as part of the Student Staff Solidarity and the Warwick Stands with Palestine Coalition. She's recently written an article titled "Why Palestine is a Feminist Issue, a Reckoning with Western Feminism in the Time of Genocide." It's a brilliant article that includes a collective of female academics, and I urge you all to read it from the first 2025 issue of the International Feminist Journal of Politics. But for those of you who may not be able to access it, I wanted to read you the introduction today. The collection of contributions here aims to confront the silences and complicities within feminism, urging scholars and activists to reassess the global impacts of colonial violence and reaffirm their commitment to justice and human dignity. By bringing together Palestinian feminist scholars and feminists from across the Middle East, we seek to inspire accountability and solidarity within the feminist movement. Bearing witness to the genocide in Gaza and the broader Palestinian struggle requires feminists, particularly in the West, to speak out, take action, and challenge the systems that perpetuate oppression and dispossession. Genuine solidarity demands rejecting colonial narratives that prioritize certain lives over others and addressing the radicalized biases embedded within feminist frameworks. By centering Palestinian voices and experiences, feminism can move toward a truly inclusive movement that upholds the dignity and rights of all people. I wish I could read the whole article out, but I would run out of time. However, I think that this specific paragraph really does speak to the aims of today and what this day should mean to us all. So thank you, and Free Palestine.
Thanks so much, Mads, for reminding us about the importance of intersectionality, reminding us of female resistance tactics, educating us about the PFWAC, but also reading that section of the article out and, bigging up another sister, because that's important too. We should always lift as we rise, and encourage and empower others to do the same. So thank you for that. I'll definitely be trying to access the article. Whether I'll get it or not will be another thing, but brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Mads. Speaking of bigging up sisters, our next speaker is Louise Regan, who has been on numerous solidarity delegations to Palestine. He's a well-known NEU activist. You don't see a Palestine demo without Louise there. She's the chair of Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which is such an important campaign that we should all be individual and affiliate members of. And it's always a pleasure to share a platform with Louise. She's so knowledgeable about the issues, and I can't wait to hear what you've got to say this evening. So Louise, you are more than welcome.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, Sarah, but it's an absolute privilege to be here, and I completely agree with Sophie. We should have many more of these events where there are women only speaking, because they are very powerful. And I would like to say a huge thanks to Mads. It was very interesting listening to her contribution, and it's really important that we look at everybody's involvement. And it's interesting that some people criticize when we do certain things, but people should find their own ways into solidarity work, and whatever that is, it's important, and obviously it worked very well for them. So yes, I am the chair of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. I'm very privileged and honoured to hold that position, and have been a long time campaigner for justice for the Palestinian people. Obviously, since the start of the war on Gaza, many of us have said that this has been a war on women and children. Nearly 70% of those that have been killed in the war are women and children. On average, during the war, 63 women, including 37 mothers, were killed daily. And since the start of the war on Gaza, an estimated 17,000 Palestinian children have been orphaned. Of those Palestinians injured, an estimated 75% of those are women. And in light of those drastic figures, the UN Women even referred to it as a war against women. Nearly 1 million women and girls have been living in overcrowded shelters, lacking adequate water, sanitation and hygiene facilities, as well as limited privacy for menstrual hygiene management for over 690,000 women and girls. This led to increased health risks, particularly for the estimated 155,000 pregnant, birthing, postpartum or breastfeeding women. Also, the lack of menstrual hygiene products increased the risk of infection for women and girls, and there were huge stories at the time of women tearing strips of tents to use as period products. In July 2024, maternal health experts reported that the rate of miscarriage in Gaza had increased by up to 300% since October the 7th. Israel's blockade of Gaza, in violation of international humanitarian law and the use of starvation as a method of warfare, have caused acute food insecurity for most of those living in Gaza. 60,000 cases of acute malnutrition amongst children between the ages of 6 and 59 months, and 16,500 cases of pregnant and breastfeeding women who needed treatment for acute malnutrition. The United Nations Population Fund reported that at the end of December 2024, over 48,000 pregnant women were experiencing emergency and catastrophic food insecurity. Limited access to safe water was a major problem for pregnant women in Gaza. Many have reported dehydration, and some have said they are only able to access highly saline water. Others spoke of being unable to wash themselves throughout their pregnancy. The lack of access to adequate nutrition, water, and sanitation has serious health consequences, particularly for pregnant women and girls and their children. Pregnant women in Gaza also described how, like many others in Gaza, their mental health had been under immense strain since the start of the hostilities. All of this is horrific and will take decades, if ever these women are able to recover from that. In 2023, already months into the genocide, Palestinian feminists, including the UPWC, released a call from Palestinian women. They called on people across the world to escalate our campaigns, to show meaningful material solidarity by taking action to bring down Israel's regime of oppression. They called for aid to Gaza, to reject the forcible transfer of Palestinians from their homes, and for all countries to impose a comprehensive military security embargo on Israel. Shamefully, our government has utterly failed to answer this call, and it is up to us to ensure that they are held to account. As the statement from Palestinian feminists reads, this moment is the litmus test for humanity and the very meaning of justice and freedom. If not now, then when? In the honour of every Palestinian woman killed, of everyone still fighting, we must take action on this International Women's Day to end British complicity in Israel's occupation, apartheid, and genocide. And I want to end on this. I've witnessed the steadfastness of the Palestinian women throughout the time I've been involved, from the women protesting against the occupation and the impact that Israeli apartheid is having on their lives, to those that are protecting their villages, their water wells, and their olive fields. Palestinian women will continue to struggle for their freedom, for justice for their people, and we must continue to do all that we can to stand with them, to speak out for justice until all Palestinians are finally free. Solidarity and free Palestine.
Thank you so much for that, Louise. And you know, the importance of events like this tonight are, those figures are shocking, and you're right, they are horrific, and it's going to take generations to kind of get back to some sort of normal once the Palestinian people are free. But it's important because people outside of the movement that aren't active like we are don't hear about this. They don't see it on the news. We're not told about it in the media, but they should know about it, because if they knew about the stats that you've just gone through, people would be angry and they would want to act, which, you know, is no coincidence why we're not told about it on the news, is it? But thank you for that, Louise. And, you know, everybody that's watching it, please get this shared on social media, because, you know, we criticize social media a hell of a lot. But actually, getting it out there on your social media pages will mean that people that aren't necessarily active in our movement will hear about some of the horrors that Palestinian women and Palestinians in general are going through, because we need to get the message out there. We need to get the information out there, because that's how we build up solidarity. Enough from me. I would stand on my soapbox on that all night. Our final speaker, and it's an absolute privilege to be able to introduce our main speaker this evening from Palestine. Samia Al-Botmeh has spoken at these important events before. She's an assistant professor in economics at Birzeit University and a powerful voice for peace and justice for Palestine on the international stage. Samia, it's a privilege to invite you to come along and speak. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everyone, for your powerful solidarity and powerful stance with Palestinians in general, and particularly with Palestinian women. It's an honor for me to be part of this meeting, particularly on the International Working Women's Day. I will, in a way, talk a bit actually about how the lives of women, particularly working women, have been structured within Palestinian society and Palestinian existence for now more than 7 decades under Israel's colonialism. Palestinian women, of course, have to endure, as the rest of the Palestinians endure, Israel's repression, colonial atrocities at 2 levels. The first one is they themselves, as Palestinian women, having to endure arrests, having to endure killings, having to endure house demolitions, injuries, and so on and so forth. and surviving in this reality of injustice and repression. So there is a level of they themselves having to survive and challenge and resist. But there is another level of having to support, as women do everywhere around the world, every other member of family who actually has to endure these atrocities. So the burden on women is actually double that of the rest of Palestinians. And over the years, Palestinian women have carried this huge burden and not just showed resilience and steadfastness, but have been at the forefront of the resistance mechanisms and the challenge to Israel's colonialism. Palestinian women utilized education actually as a mechanism of resistance and steadfastness. So they've managed over the years, despite being displaced, ethnically cleansed, despite having to endure in Gaza Strip a long siege, in the West Bank, movement restrictions, and so on and so forth, have managed to become actually the most educated in the region compared to other women, but also compared to men. Yet, if we look at their situation in the labor market as working women, Palestinian women tend to be the least participating group of women in the world in the labor market. And something like 18% or so, which is, and the world average is something like 50%. Now, at the same time, we have a very high unemployment rate for women, which is nearly triple that of men. These statistics actually are not economic. These statistics are political, because at the root cause of this extremely horrific situation for women is Israel's colonialism, the destruction of the productive sectors within the Palestinian reality, be it in the Gaza Strip or the West Bank. I'm talking, this is before the ongoing genocide. The current ongoing genocide in the Gaza Strip has basically led to the marginalization of women on the side, since women basically have engaged in the rest of the world in these productive sectors in addition to services. So colonization has actually exerted a much heavier repressive policies on women compared to men. So women do not just have to deal with issues of patriarchy and utilization of their education and so on in the public space, but women have to structurally endure the impacts and repercussions of decades-long colonization. So on Women's Day, on Women's Working Women's Day, we can say that Palestinian women have no place in the working reality, despite fighting very hard for that because of Israel's colonialism. Now, Palestinian women are having to endure, as Louise and everyone else explained, more than 70% of Palestinian women in Gaza, the ones that have been killed, injured, and actually missing, are women and children. So 70% of those who are under the rubble or missing are women and children. In that sense, it is really a war against women. Within the West Bank, the detainment of Palestinian women has been an extremely vicious tool exercised by Israel. We have had a lot of our students at Birzeit, women students at Birzeit, colleagues who have been detained in prison. and the conditions that they have had to face have been extremely, extremely inhumane, to the extent that the amount of air that they can breathe is limited. One of our colleagues, she spent nearly 9 months in prison. Very much of the time she was in solitary confinement. Very much of the time she had to try and sniff some air from the bottom of the door in order to breathe, because the room had no air. So the manner with which Israel has been torturing and punishing Palestinian prisoners in general, and particularly women, has actually it's unbelievable. Limiting the air that one can breathe is a form of torture that hasn't crossed the minds of any colonialists before. So the reality within which women have been living within the West Bank and Gaza Strip has been extremely harsh, to say the least. Within the Gaza Strip, the lack of dignity, as many of the speakers have explained, has been a very touching issue. The fact that women have no privacy, the fact that they have to live with a reality where they don't know where their children are, where their husbands are, where their brothers and sisters are. People just go out to get some food, get some wood, and they do not come back. And the fact that these missing people, no one knows where they are, what happened to them, it adds on to the harshness of what everyone has to endure, but particularly women. More than 15,000 women in the Gaza Strip have lost their partners. And therefore, overnight, they suddenly have had to take care of their families. They have to find some form of a shelter for their families. They have to provide for their families. They have to care for their children. And they have to try and protect their families as much as they can. All of that is basically women's task that women have been carrying and have to carry with dignity and with as much care as possible. Within the West Bank, the displacement of 40,000 people from the northern West Bank refugee camps, Jenin and Tulkarem, have also touched women and girls' lives. These families that have been displaced have moved into houses of either relatives or friends, or just the communities in the north. And the fact that women have to still care for their families within these substitute shelters are also an extremely difficult reality with which women have to survive. Movement restrictions and the torturing and the humiliation of women at checkpoints has been a repeated phenomena here within the West Bank. Very much of the time, if someone smiles, they're taken off a taxi or a bus and are beaten up really badly, particularly women. And their crime has been a smile. They shouldn't smile. So there has been this random viciousness targeted at people, particularly young women. those who commute for their university education or young women professionals. Settler violence has also been on the rise in the West Bank under the protection of the Israeli army, and this violence basically targets the lives and livelihoods of people. And the reaction of Israeli officials has been basically to encourage settlers to put their hands on the land, encourage settlers to confiscate properties, to beat up Palestinians, to gun Palestinians down, to seize resources, particularly water resources, and to try and get Palestinians off agricultural land. Getting Palestinians off the land basically is a form of ethnic cleansing, but also is a form of displacing people's livelihoods. And women are the group of people here in Palestine who are engaged in agriculture. So settler violence targeted either at land or resources, including water, basically is violence targeted at women directly. Women's access to jobs and women's access to livelihoods and their access to space, to their future communities' expansion and growth. I just want to end here by a note on issues of solidarity. Palestinians here actually are aware of solidarity actions taking place across the world, in the UK in particular, and that is very heartening, both to Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. It's important that you know that Palestinians in the Gaza Strip can actually see these actions, and it is very, very important. Very important in terms of knowing that there are conscientious individuals, groups, civil society, trade unions that are standing with you. Yet, it is very important to transform this popular support and solidarity into pressure on governments. It is not acceptable for the British government to supply Israel with weapons, with military tools and equipment, and then issue statements feeling unacceptable about what happens in the Gaza Strip. This shouldn't be this double standards, this treating Israel above the law. It shouldn't be acceptable. Actions of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, economic, cultural, academic, are extremely important because these actions expose Israel's face, true face, its face as a vicious colonial entity that has been engaged in genocide, in ethnically cleansing the Palestinians. And despite the international government's stance with Israel, we as individuals, as groups, as civil society, we shouldn't be accepting that. And as happened in apartheid South Africa, we have to transform this pressure into action, into divestment actions by government, into sanctions on Israel till it actually stops its atrocities and abides by international law, engages in decolonization, and ends its apartheid system. Thank you for your solidarity, and thank you for your stance with justice. And we hope that our work together will bring liberation, decolonization, and justice to Palestine. Thank you.
Samia, no, thank you for that contribution. And I know that if we were all in a room physically together right now, there would be a standing ovation with a round of applause. And it's just a shame, you know, the good thing about being online is we can have people all over the world listening, but you don't get that standing ovation that you would we be all together. I don't even know where to start to make any comments. So I'm not even going to try, other than thank you for being the voice of Palestinian people, letting us know that the solidarity actions are taking place, and that brothers and sisters and siblings and friends over in Palestine do know that they're happening. And I would encourage anybody that's sat and listened to the whole session tonight, put motions through to your unions to get to conferences, get their parliamentary groups raising this and applying pressure politically, as well as us as being out on the streets demonstrating, because, you know, most unions do have parliamentary groups, and you can feed in that way, because we do need to apply that pressure, because yeah, what is going on is criminal. It is criminal, and those thousands and thousands and thousands of women and children that are missing deserve justice, as does everybody else. But they certainly do. Thank you so much for that, Samia. Yeah, thank you for that. I am going to close the meeting now. Thank you to everybody for joining, and to all our brilliant speakers. It's been such a fantastic hour spent together, listening to some shocking statistics, but actually getting the message out there. It's so vitally important. International solidarity is vital for our movement. Thank you to Labour and Palestine volunteers for organising this, and the Arise Festival volunteers for helping with the tech hosting. If you can afford to, please do make a donation towards hosting and streaming costs using the links provided in the chat. As Labour movement activists who stand with the Palestinian people internationally, our job here is to raise awareness of these issues and speak up in solidarity with the people of Palestine. Share tonight's video, talk about what we've heard about tonight. Make sure that message goes much further than us all sat here listening to it. Thank you again to everybody. Solidarity and free Palestine.